Hi, there's a word that constantly gets thrown around within spiritual and personal development spaces: surrender. And it's usually said in a way that assumes that you can simply decide it, like flipping a switch, as if letting go is an act of will. But especially for people that have a lot of awareness and that have built their lives through intelligence, responsibility, discipline, and adaptation. Surrender isn't just a choice you make. If you have ever tried to just surrender and felt more tension instead of relief, there's nothing wrong with you. The problem is in how it gets framed. Because surrender is not something we simply choose to do, it's an effect. And today I want to name a couple of things that actually come before surrender, especially for people who are capable, high functioning, or used to carrying a lot of weight. That's the paradox. Most of you listening aren't lacking insight. You're probably deeply reflective. You have questioned yourself, reoriented, taken responsibility. You have built something, a life, a business, a reputation, a role, and from the outside, it probably looks like everything is working. But internally, something feels off, constricted, like effort is always required, and rest always needs to be earned, like you are holding your life together instead of fully living it. And when you are holding a lot at once, and someone says to simply surrender, the system doesn't relax, it braces for impact. Because surrender, as it's usually taught, doesn't make sense to a system that has learned to survive by being alert, precise, capable. Surrender is what naturally happens when resistance is no longer required. And resistance doesn't disappear because you simply decide to get rid of it. Resistance disappears when your system no longer needs it to feel in control. But here is the thing: for high capacity people, resistance was the very thing that brought some kind of structure. It was a form of intelligence that kept everything moving. An adaptation strategy. It was how you stayed alive, stable, and functional in environments that required you to be sharp, responsible, and ahead of the curve. So when someone tells you to simply surrender, or you hear things like just surrender to life, without addressing why that resistance was needed in the first place, your system will translate that as danger. It has nothing to do with spiritual failure or incapability. Just trusting another direction, slowing down, letting go doesn't work. Not because you are missing something, but because we are missing context and something very essential gets overlooked. So let's talk about trust for a moment. Because trust is not a belief system. It is not optimism or having faith in something abstract. Trust is built through experience. Think about something simple: the free fall. If someone stands behind you and you have to let yourself fall based on trust, you don't simply decide to just trust them. Your body, your system, your prior experiences are going to try to predict the future. You're going to ask yourself, have they caught you before? Do you feel safe with them? Is there any form of consistency? If the answer is no, you won't let yourself fall, no matter how much you think you want to. There's a lack of inner coherence, and life works exactly the same way. You don't surrender because someone simply tells you to do, even if it's just you expecting it from yourself. You surrender when your system has learned, through experience, that it's safe to do so. Which means that surrender cannot be forced. It's an organic outcome through the process of experience. If we stay in resistance around the things that just want to move, we stay busy managing them. And if we are busy managing them, surrender as a natural result of letting that movement happen becomes impossible. That is how we are getting in the way of our own freedom. Surrendering at the right moment can unlock the most profound shifts in our lives. Before surrender, something else needs to happen. We need to decrease resistance. And resistance doesn't decrease through insight only. It decreases through safety, not spiritualized or conceptual safety, but structural, embodied, integrated inner safety. In how your life and responsibility is held, in how much pressure you are under, in whether effort is optional or forced and mandatory. Surrender has no place to land if your life requires constant hypervigilance and harsh discipline just to keep functioning, because your system is doing its job. It's a perfectly calibrated structure designed to keep everything running. And this is where I want to be clear. There's nothing morally, spiritually, or energetically wrong with you if you cannot surrender, or if surrender feels out of reach right now. And there's no hidden lesson that requires a prolonged state of pressure to make you worthy of relief. At a certain point, intensity stops being reasonable, elevating, or even initiatory, and starts being depleting. And depletion doesn't create wisdom. It doesn't open anything. It just narrows perception. If you are in the middle of that, and you find yourself unable to see the other side, it shows where more capacity is needed. It's an invitation to look a little deeper within yourself, and the choice to respond to that invitation is always yours. Highly intelligent people struggle with surrender for a very specific reason. They don't respond to incoherent instructions. Let go, surrender, trust. What does that even mean? Without structure, those become empty commands. Intelligence needs orientation. For the system, it needs a sequence, cause and effect. And when surrender gets presented without a structural pathway, the mind will reject it. Forcing yourself out of control will never ever work, because that control is placed very strategically. So if the whole concept of surrender ever felt vague, ungrounded, or even insulting at times, that reaction is actually quite accurate. You don't live as your body, your consciousness moves through the body. And if the body is under constant pressure, consciousness adapts and contracts to that pressure. Contraction conserves and preserves energy, which means you cannot surrender into expansion from inside a system that is still conserving. This is why insight alone eventually stops working. Insight sharpens perception, but it doesn't reorganize the structure you are living inside. When you fully integrate and embody, moving through the process without skipping steps, it's no longer just an idea you hold. It becomes a state you live from. So the real question is not how do I surrender? The real question is how do I create conditions for myself so that surrender becomes a natural outcome. That's a completely different level of work. It's not necessarily about doing less or becoming softer, but more so about removing the things that your system no longer needs to carry in order to stay effective. To create space for inner refinement and reorganization of the self. When you decrease resistance, your power becomes way more precise, way more sustainable, because you stop fighting with your own inner structure. That is where surrender stops feeling like a free fall. It becomes a new form of power. It opens the way for full alignment. Most conversations about surrender happen at the level of mindset or spirituality. But very few question the structure, whether your life is actually designed to hold who you are now and who you are becoming. That is the layer behind high capacity that no one really talks about. This is the level where surrender becomes a natural byproduct, where you no longer need resistance to hold your life together. Not because we force ourselves into surrender, but because nothing inside of you feels the need to fight anymore. No. No. That's not what we do here. We don't optimize misalignment. We don't force ourselves into surrender. Absolutely the fuck not. Okay? That's it for now. Gaat hierbij laten. Houdoe en tot ziens. Honor your inner space and carry yourself with grace. See you next time.